Hi, everybody. Well, the summer's over. Uh, I think the best thing we can say about this summer is that it brings 2020 closer to an end. And I promise it will end. Uh, you may have noticed I have shaved my beard because it's more mask friendly. I'm looking forward to a time when that is no longer an issue. I'm going to be starting up my reading series again with some new readings. I'm starting off with Everlost. Everlost is being reissued with brand new covers, really cool covers. You can see right here is Everlost, Everwild, and Everfound. And these particular covers I'm going to be doing a giveaway on. So I'm going to autograph them and there's going to be winners. So if you're interested, just stay tuned on Facebook and on Twitter, and I'll be posting how you can win autographed covers. Uh, but for now, I'm going to be reading from the old book because I haven't even received my new ones yet. So I'm not going to start at the beginning, so I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of what has happened so far. I'm going to read two separate sections. We've met the characters of Allie and Nick, who have crossed over into Everlost and are trying to figure out what's going on. Everlost is this world between life and death that they found themselves trapped in because they kind of lost their way on the way to the light. We also meet the character of Leaf, who finds them in the woods, and they are headed south from basically from upstate New York. Uh, the chapter I'm going to start with is the meeting of Mary Hightower, who is a really important character in the entire series. Chapter 5, Friends in High Places. Mary Hightower was not born with that name. She could no longer remember what her true name was, although she was relatively certain her first name started with an M. She took the name Mary because it seemed a proper, motherly name. True, she was only 15, but had she lived, she would most certainly have become a mother. And anyway, she was a mother to those who needed one, and there were many. The name Hightower came because she was the very first who dared to ascend. That singular bold act of climbing the stairs and staking a claim had earned her a level of respect from others she could not have imagined. They were in awe of her, and many other Everlost children followed her lead. Realizing her position was now high in more ways than one, she decided it was time to share what she knew about Everlost with all the Afterlights. Although she had been writing for more than 100 years, she had only shared it with a small group of younger children she had taken under her wing. But the moment she became Mary Hightower, all that changed. Now, her writings were read by everyone, and what had once been a small group of children in her care had grown into hundreds. She had no doubt she would eventually be a mother to thousands. Some people thought of her as a god. She had no desire to be a god, but she did like the respect and honor with which she was now treated. Of course, she did have her enemies, and they called her less flattering things, but always from a safe distance. Today, her view from the top floor was magnificent, and sometimes she swore she could see the whole world from here. Yet she knew it was a world that had gone on without her. Far below, the traffic of the living world passed. Dots of buses and taxis in constant congestion. Let them go about their business, she thought. It means nothing to me. My concern is this world, not theirs. A knock at the door drew her attention away from the view. In a moment, Stradivarius stepped in, a mousy boy with tufts of tightly curled blonde hair. What is it, Vari? A finder's here to see you, Miss Mary. He says he's got something really good. Mary sighed. Everyone called themselves finders these days. Usually they had never actually found anything of importance. A scrap of paper, a piece of driftwood maybe. The true finders had far better goods. They were masters at what they did and knew all the circumstances that could cause an object to cross over into Everlost. The true finders were few. "Is this someone we've seen before?" "I think so," said Stradivarius. "And I think he's got real food." This news caught Mary's attention, although she tried not to show Vari how much. She was good at keeping her emotions to herself, but if the finder truly had food that had crossed over from the living world, it would be hard to contain herself. "Show him in." Vari slipped out and returned with a young man about 13 years old wearing nothing but a bathing suit, its waistband hidden by a pasty root beer belly. Well, thought Mary, we can't choose the moment and manner of our crossing. Just as this boy was condemned to travel eternity in a wet bathing suit, she was consigned to the most uncomfortable school dress she owned. The only good thing about it was that it was green and matched her eyes. "Hi, Miss Mary," said the finder, respectfully. "You remember me, right?" He smiled, but his mouth stretched much too wide, and he had far too many teeth, giving the impression that she could tip back the top of his head like a boy-shaped cookie jar. "Yes, I remember you. You're Speedo from New Jersey. The last time you came you brought an orange, wasn't it?" "Grapefruit," he said, thrilled to be remembered. It had been a long time since she had last seen this particular finder, but how could she forget that bathing suit? "What did you bring today?" His smile stretched even wider. Now he was teeth all the way to his ears. "I brought something fantastic. How would you like a little dessert?" "Dessert?" said Mary. "Please don't tell me you brought some of those horrid fortune cookies." Clearly, Speedo was offended by the suggestion. "I'm a finder, Miss Mary. I know better than to waste your time with fortune cookies. I won't even touch them." "That's very wise," Mary told him. "And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to insult you. Please, show me what you've got." He hurried out and returned with a box he set on the table. "You may want to sit down," he told her. When she didn't, he removed the lid to reveal something Mary thought she'd never have the good fortune to see again. A birthday cake. There was no sense trying to hide her astonishment. And yes, perhaps she should have sat down because the sight of it made her feel faint. This wasn't just a slice of bread or a gnawed chicken bone, as many of the food finders brought. This was an entire birthday cake. Round and white, completely unmarred, it said, "Happy 5th birthday, Susie." She had no idea who Susie was, and she didn't care because if she was having a birthday, she was one of the living, and the living were not her concern. Mary lifted her finger, then turned to the finder. "May I?" "Of course." Slowly, carefully, she dipped her finger down and touched it to the cake, dragging it over the tiniest edge, feeling the frosting stick to her fingertip. She pulled her finger back and put it in her mouth to taste. The explosion of flavor was almost too much to bear. It took over all her senses, and she had to close her eyes. Vanilla buttercream, so perfectly sweet. "It's good stuff, huh?" said Speedo. "I was going to eat it myself, but then I thought my favorite customer might want it." And he added, "That's you," just in case there was any doubt. Mary grinned and clapped her hands together as she realized how the finder had come across the cake. "You waited at birthday parties. How very clever." Everyone knew the only food that ever crossed over was food lovingly prepared, and it only happened when that lovingly prepared food met an untimely, unlikely end. Where better to find such food than a birthday party where mothers bake their love right into the batter? "That's brilliant," Mary said. "Absolutely brilliant." Speedo looked nervous and hitched up his bathing suit, a nervous habit since it was in no danger of falling down. "You're not going to tell anyone, are you? I mean, it's a trade secret. If people knew where I go to find food, everyone else will do the same and I'll be out of business." "I won't tell a soul," Mary said. "But you have to tell me one thing. How many birthday parties did you have to sit through until a cake crossed over?" He puffed up proudly. 378. Mary shook her head. You must be sick of birthdays. Hey, do you know what I've got to do? Hey, you do what you got to do, right? Then he walked around talking about the cake like it was a used car he was trying to sell. It was something to watch, though. That little kid reached up and pulled the whole cake right off the table before they could even put the candles in. It smashed in a heap on the floor, but as you can see, it left a lasting impression on the table where it sat. The ghost of a birthday cake, just waiting for me to take. Mary looked at the cake and thought about dipping her finger in again, but stopped herself. It would be too easy to keep on eating it and not stop until the last crumb was gone. So, said Speedo, what do you think it's worth? What are you asking? How am I supposed to know what I want when I don't know what you got to give? Mary considered this. The cake was worth 10 times anything she had ever traded for. This, she knew, was the finder's gold mine, and he might never find another one. He deserved a fair and honest trade. Mary crossed the large room to a chest of drawers and pulled out a set of keys. She tossed them to Speedo, and he caught it. Keys, he said. I found lots of keys. They ain't no good unless the thing they unlock also cross into Everlost, and that never happens. Something very strange happened in the living world a few weeks ago, Mary told him. A man sent his car into one end of a car wash, and it never came out the other end. No one has any idea what happened to it. He looked at her, his face a mix of hope and distrust. And what did happen to it? Sunspots. Huh? Mary sighed. If you had read my book, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Vortexes But Were Afraid to Ask, then you would know that sunspot activity tends to create vortexes from the living world to ours, through which living objects sometimes fall. Oh, said Speedo. Sunspots, yeah. Mary grinned. In a parking stall at the north side of Old Penn Station, you'll find a silver Jaguar. I don't travel much, so I doubt I'd have much use for it. It's yours, if you promise to bring me all of your best food finds. She could tell that the finder was excited about the car, but he was a good negotiator. Well, he said, I already do have a pretty sweet ride. Yes, said Mary. You talked about it last time you were here. As I recall, it's more trouble than it's worth because you can never find a place to park it. Yeah, he said. I guess I could do with something smaller. Okay, it's a deal. He shook her hand a little too forcefully, finally letting his true excitement show. A Jag. Wow. His smile stretched right into the middle of his ears, and Mary simply had to say something about it. Somebody had to. You should try to remember that the living only have 32 teeth. He looked at her, stunned by her directness. 8 incisors, Mary continued, 4 canine, 8 bicuspids, and 12 molars, if you've got wisdom teeth. Oh, he said, getting red in the face. It's clear you put a lot of importance on your smile, but when you think about it too much, it starts to take over. Even before he turned to leave, Mary could see the information taking effect. His mouth was shrinking back to sensible proportions. The next part I'm going to read is right at the time our other characters, Allie, Nick, and Leaf, come across, well, the place where Mary lives. Chapter 7, The Forever Places. In the course of time and history, there are certain places that can never truly be lost. The living world, by its very nature, moves on, but some places are forever. The boy now called Leaf had the good fortune to stumble upon such a place many years before, a lush mountain forest that had once been the inspiration for poets. The place brimmed with such warmth and good feeling, it inspired countless young men to propose marriage beneath its canopy and countless young women to accept. The woods caused stiff-collared people to lose their inhibitions and dance among the leaves, wild with joy, even though they knew such dancing could have them condemned as witches. The forest was a fulcrum of life, and so when it grew old and a beetle infestation routed bark and bough, the forest did not die. Instead, it crossed. Its life persisted, not in the living world, but in Everlost. Here it would be eternally green and on the verge of turning, just as the poets themselves would have liked to see it had they not gotten where they were going. It can be said, then, that Everlost is heaven. Perhaps not for people, but for the places that deserve a share of forever. Such places are few and far between, these grand islands of eternity in the soupy, ever-changing world of the living. New York had its share of forever places. The greatest of these stood near Manhattan's southernmost tip, the two gray brothers to the green statue in the bay. The towers had found their heaven. They were a part of Everlost now, held fast and held forever by the memories of a mourning world, and by the dignity of the souls who got where they were going on that dark September day. The three kids approached the great twin towers in silence. What they saw as they neared them was not at all what they expected. There were children there, dozens of them. That reading is kind of one of the reasons why I wrote Everlost. The realization that the World Trade Center would exist in Everlost, and there those and nothing, and no one will ever tear them down. That thought made me feel a need to write this story. I had had the idea for this story years before I even wrote it, but it was that connection that made me want to tell it. And when I first started, I thought it was going to be one book, but as the story expanded, I realized I couldn't fit this whole story into one volume. And so right around that point, when they came across the Twin Towers, that's when I realized this was the start of a trilogy. I hope you enjoyed that reading of Everlost, and I'll be back next week with a new one.